Ethan Walker had spent millions trying to save his twin sons from a disease every doctor swore would leave them paralyzed. But everything he believed shattered the day he found them standing laughing right in front of him. The truth wasn't hidden in a hospital or a lab. It was inside his own home, and the person who uncovered it wasn't a doctor, but the young nanny he had just fired. Ethan Walker had always believed that money could solve anything. In Silicon Valley, that belief wasn't arrogance, it was a survival skill. He had built an empire out of code and algorithms, outsmarting every obstacle thrown his way: competitors, market crashes, failed prototypes, hostile acquisition. But no amount of success could prepare him for the moment two top specialists from Houston and Boston sat from him in a sterile consultation room and told him that his 5-year-old twins, Liam and Noah, were facing a degenerative muscle disorder that would slowly erase their ability to walk, stand, or even hold their heads upright. The diagnosis hit him with the force of a wrecking ball. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt outmatched. The doctors spoke in clinical tones, outlining treatment plans, worst-case scenarios, and the inevitability of decline. He listened, but everything in him rebelled. His sons were bright, curious boys who loved building Lego towers and racing toy cars down the marble hallways of their Pacific Heights home. Accepting that they would soon be prisoners in their own bodies felt unthinkable. So he did what he always did when faced with the impossible. He threw every resource he had at it. Within weeks, he hired a full team: neurologists, physical therapists, genetic specialists, private consultants. He wired donations to hospitals in exchange for priority access to experimental treatments. He bought the newest wheelchairs from a Japanese manufacturer whose prototypes cost more than sports cars. He converted an entire wing of his mansion into a medical suite, complete with machines that beeped and breathed like an EQ. And at the center of it all was Miranda Hall, the nurse who came so highly recommended she might as well have descended from heaven. She had the RSUM, the awards, the reputation. She knew how to talk to anxious parents and how to soothe the children who hated needles. She carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who had seen every tragedy the human body could produce and knew how to manage it. Ethan trusted her from day one. He needed to. His company was expanding, the board demanded his attention, and investors rarely cared that the CEO was also a father desperate to keep two small boys alive and functioning. Miranda assured him she could handle everything, and she did with a precision that bordered on rigid perfection. She controlled the boys' medication schedules, their diets, their sleep cycles, their exercise routines. She documented every twitch, every stumble, every faint attempt at movement. When she spoke with authority, and Ethan listened because he wanted to believe she held the answers that science had failed to deliver. Over time, the boys grew weaker, their legs stiffened, their little bodies drooped in their wheelchairs after only minutes of activity. Some days they seemed barely present, as if a fog had settled over them. Ethan hated seeing it, but Miranda always had an explanation. The disease is progressing. This is expected. We must manage expectations, Mr. Walker. She said the same lines so often that they became part of Ethan's daily reality. Phrases he repeated to himself when despair threatened to break him. He visited every night after work, kneeling beside Liam's and Noah's beds, trying to hide how terrified he was. He promised them that Dad would fix it. Dad always fixes things. But deep down, he feared the truth. This was something he couldn't buy, bully, negotiate, or innovate his way out of. By the time winter settled over San Francisco, the mansion felt less like a home and more like a hospital. Laughter had faded. The boys' toys collected dust. The halls that once echoed with their footsteps now hosted murmurs from medical staff. Ethan tried to function, running meetings, closing deals, speaking at conferences, but his mind drifted constantly back to the twins. It tore him apart that he couldn't be with them every moment, so he clung to the reports Miranda handed him. He memorized every graph, every chart, every percentage. He convinced himself that decline meant the diagnosis was accurate, and that accuracy meant he wasn't failing them, he was just powerless against nature. And then Emma Brooks arrived. She hadn't been part of any plan. She wasn't hired through an agency or recommended by an elite medical network. She came from a small town in Oregon with modest credentials and a calm, steady energy that Ethan barely noticed when he interviewed her. He hired her simply because the house needed an extra pair of hands for cleaning and basic household tasks. He didn't think for a second that she would become part of his son's story. For months, Ethan remained wrapped in meetings and treatments, chasing solutions that didn't exist, while Emma moved quietly through the mansion. Cleaning rooms, folding blankets, organizing shelves. He barely spoke to her. He never asked where she came from or what she hoped for. She was just another staff member in a house full of professionals who were supposed to know more than he did. He had no idea she was watching, No idea she noticed the way the boys brightened when adults treated them like children, not patients. No idea she understood that movement could be medicine too. And he certainly had no idea that she was the only one in the house brave enough to question the narrative everyone else had accepted. If Ethan had looked more closely, he might have seen it sooner, the way Liam's eyes followed Emma as she dusted near their wheelchairs, the way No giggled when she made faces at him while mopping the floor. But Ethan was lost in spreadsheets and medical jargon, convinced the future was predetermined. He had built a fortress of experts around his sons, believing authority equaled truth. He didn't know that the people he trusted most were the ones hurting his children, nor that the person he overlooked was the only one who saw what was really happening. For a man who had conquered industries, it was almost impossible to grasp that everything he believed, the diagnosis, the treatment, the decline, was a lie crafted right in front of him. And the first crack in that lie would appear not in a lab report or a medical briefing, but in the moment he walked into his living room and saw a miracle he wasn't ready to understand: his sons standing upright, reaching toward Emma Brooks, their legs trembling but very much alive. The day everything shifted for Ethan Walker began like any other: early conference calls, a flood of emails, a board demanding answers he didn't have time to give. He returned home later than planned, already exhausted, ready to check on the twins before heading to the security room to review medical updates. But halfway through the hallway, a sound, soft giggles, faint but vivid, pulled him toward the living room. It was the kind of sound he hadn't heard in months. His heart lurched, hopeful and afraid at the same time, and he followed it without thinking. What he found when he stepped through the doorway didn't make sense. The scene hit him so hard he dropped the folder in his hand. Liam and No, his frail, medicated, wheelchair-bound boys, were standing, not wobbling in place with help from medical braces or strapped to therapy equipment. They were standing freely, their legs trembling under their small bodies but firmly planted on the rug, their hands stretched upward toward someone he had barely acknowledged since the day she was hired. Emma Brooks stood in front of them, wearing her usual yellow cleaning gloves, her eyes bright with encouragement. She held her palms out like a coach coaxing toddlers through their first steps. The twins were laughing, leaning toward her as if they trusted her completely. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. It felt as if the universe had bent itself into a shape he didn't recognize. All the specialists who insisted the boys' muscles were deteriorating, all the charts that detailed their decline, all the predictions that they would soon lose the ability to stand entirely, all of it crashed into this single moment where his sons stood defying everything he thought he knew. Emma didn't notice him right away. She was too focused on the boys, cheering them on with a warmth that radiated through the room. But Ethan's entrance startled her. She turned, eyes widening, her hands falling to her sides. The twins' balance faltered, and they instinctively reached for her again, trusting her more than the father who had been kept at a distance by fear and medical rules. Ethan's mind raced. None of this aligned with the reports he'd been given. Miranda had insisted the boys' muscles were weakening faster than expected. She'd said increased medication was necessary to protect their fragile systems. She'd emphasized that any strenuous activity could cause lasting damage. Yet here were his sons, proving the exact opposite, lifting their feet, shifting their weight, fighting gravity with determination he thought had been stripped from them. Panic flared in his chest. He rushed forward, not to help, but to separate Emma from the boys. His voice cracked, sharp and angry, fueled by fear more than logic. In his world, fear always disguised itself as authority. "What are you doing?" he demanded, stepping between her and the boys. Emma backed up, startled but not ashamed. She held his gaze with a mixture of courage and confusion. "They asked me to play," she said. "They want to move, they need to." Liam tugged at Ethan's sleeve, wanting to reach her again, but Ethan reacted instinctively. He scooped both boys into his arms and set them firmly back in their wheelchairs. His hands shook as he strapped them in, the straps clicking into place like locks closing on his own chest. The boys protested weakly, reaching toward Emma, tears filling their eyes as their tiny bodies sagged under the weight of the medication that numbed them daily. Emma knelt beside them, instinctively reaching out, but Ethan stopped her with a glare. He turned on her with fury amplified by confusion. "Do you have any idea what could have happened?" he snapped. "My sons are not supposed to stand. They were not supposed to do anything without medical supervision. You could have injured them." Emma braced herself, inhaling slowly. She didn't shrink back like others did when Ethan raised his voice. "They can stand," she insisted. "They've been trying for weeks. They're stronger than you think. They just don't get the chance." Her confidence only made him angrier. It felt like defiance. It felt like accusation. It felt like betrayal. How dare she suggest she knew more about his son's condition than the specialists he'd paid fortunes to consult? How dare she cross boundaries placed by professionals who had studied this disease for years? He told her she was fired on the spot, his tone icy and absolute. "Pack your things," he ordered. "You have 5 minutes before security escorts you out." Her face fell. Not because she feared losing the job, but because of what it meant for the twins. "Walker, if I leave they'll lose the progress they've made," she whispered. "You don't understand what's happening to them." Ethan didn't want to hear another word. He turned away from her, refusing to engage, refusing to question the medical narrative that had shaped his every decision for the past 2 years. He was a man who trusted expertise, structure, authority, anything with credentials attached to it. Emma had none of it. She was a household worker, not a specialist. And yet the image of the twins standing replayed in his mind like a glitch in the system, something that defied every logical pathway he relied on. It unnerved him deeply. That was the moment the world arrived at the doorstep of his denial. He didn't know yet that the medication Miranda gave them had been sabotaging their strength. He didn't know Emma had been working with the boys while Miranda wasn't paying attention, helping them rebuild muscles that should never have wasted away. He didn't know that the boys adored her because she treated them like children, not diagnoses. What he did know was that the sight of them standing shook him to his core. Something was wrong with the situation, wrong with the reports, wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Still, pride and fear created a wall he didn't know how to climb over. He had already fired Emma by the time Miranda arrived, breathless and dramatic, playing the role of the devoted nurse. The boys slumped further in their chairs as the medication's effects tightened their grip. Miranda scolded Emma, argued that her actions were dangerous, and wrapped herself in medical jargon to re-establish control. Ethan clung to her explanation, desperate for certainty. But the image of his sons laughing ladder while standing with their legs trembling but alive refused to fade. He wanted to forget it. He wanted to ignore it. But deep down something began to crack, a thin fracture running through the story Miranda had constructed. And it all started with Emma Brooks, the young woman he had overlooked, the one he had just sent away, and the only person who had seen the truth hiding in plain sight. Ethan had always trusted technology more than people. He believed cameras, logs, timestamps, and biometric locks told the truth better than human memory or emotion ever could. So when a heavy uneasiness settled over him after firing Emma, he didn't go to Miranda or the medical staff for reassurance. He went straight to the place he always retreated to when things didn't add up, the security room hidden behind a panel in his home office. It was a reinforced chamber lit by a dozen screens displaying feeds from every corner of the mansion. He sat down, the chair groaning under him, and scrubbed through the footage of the afternoon with a determination sharpened by fear. He wanted to confirm that Emma had crossed a line, that he had made the right decision. But a part of him buried, uncomfortable, persistent, feared he had made a terrible mistake. He started with the living room feed, replaying the moment he discovered the twins standing. The disbelief washed over him all over again. Liam's knees shook. No leaned forward with a determination he hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. Emma stood before them, encouraging them gently, her posture protective but empowering. Ethan paused the video, studying each frame like evidence in a case he wasn't ready to prosecute. Then he switched to earlier recordings from that same day. He expected to see Emma carelessly provoking the boys to do something reckless. Instead, he saw her kneeling beside them, speaking softly, offering her hands only when they reached for her. She didn't drag them into movement. She responded to what they initiated. She was careful, deliberate. Their progress felt natural, even hopeful. A thought crept into his mind: what if this wasn't an accident? What if the boys could stand because something had changed, something no one had told him about? But what? He frowned and rewound further, jumping back days, then weeks. With each clip he found the pattern repeated. Little moments, subtle signs. Liam pushing himself up slightly while Emma dusted the bookshelves. No shifting from his chair to the couch when he thought she wasn't watching. The twins trying to move whenever they were near her, as if her presence ignited something inside them that medication and therapy had beaten down. Ethan rubbed his forehead, confused and overwhelmed. Why had no one told him? Why had Miranda never mentioned these moments? Why did every report insist the boy's physical condition was worsening when the footage clearly showed otherwise? He almost reached for his phone to call Miranda, but his instincts told him to keep watching first. Answers were here on these tapes, not in conversations with people who might have their own agenda. He clicked on footage from the medical wing. The camera quality was sharper there, a precaution he'd paid extra for. What he saw next froze him in place. Miranda Hall entered the room holding a small bottle. The label turned away from the camera. She moved toward the twins' drinks juice pouches he'd bought in bulk because the boys liked the cartoon characters on them. With practiced movements, she uncapped the bottle and squeezed a few drops into each drink, looking over her shoulder occasionally as if expecting someone to walk in. She then shook the pouches, placed them on a tray, and carried them to the boys with a smile so gentle it now felt grotesque. Ethan's jaw clenched, he rewound the clip and watched again. There was no room for misinterpretation. Miranda was adding something to their drinks, something she clearly didn't want anyone to see. His breathing sharpened. He scrubbed through more footage and discovered the same pattern every morning and every afternoon. Drops of the same liquid, the same covert behavior. And after each drink, within minutes, the boys' bodies went limp, their energy drained, their heads drooping as if gravity had suddenly become crueler. His stomach twisted, his fists trembled. Miranda had been poisoning them, poisoning his children. Every symptom he believed came from the disease, the weakness, the fatigue. The inability to stay awake had been created right there in his own home by the woman he trusted most. He kept watching, needing to understand the full scope of what had been done. He scanned weeks of footage. When Emma entered the room, Miranda often hovered nearby, watching her too closely, intervening whenever Emma got too close to the boys or whenever the twins responded too positively to her presence. On several occasions, Miranda even wiped their mouths immediately after Emma fed them snacks, as if eliminating evidence of something she didn't approve of. It was manipulative, controlling behavior, almost territorial. Ethan realized Miranda hadn't just been managing the boys' care. She had been controlling every variable, ensuring the children remained sick, dependent, and incapable of improvement. Then he reached a clip that made his blood run cold. Miranda was on a phone call, pacing the hallway outside the medical wing. Her tone was sharper, urgent, not the nurturing tone she used around him. She spoke in fragments, but each piece felt like a hit to Ethan's chest. He believes the diagnosis, yes. The injections too, of course. He's paying the boys are getting weaker. We need a few more months. Lucas wants updates. Ethan recognized the name. Miranda had mentioned him only once, her brother-in-law who worked in support services for medical equipment companies. At the time, Ethan hadn't thought twice about it. Now the meaning was clear. They were running a scheme, a grotesque, calculated scheme. And his sons were the currency. His pulse hammered as he played the clip again, absorbing every nuance, every incriminating hint. Rage ignited in him like an electrical surge. He wanted to storm the house, drag Miranda out, and demand every truth she had buried. But another emotion, raw, etching guilt, rose like a storm tide. He had fired Emma, the one person who had been helping his children. He had believed Miranda without question. He had accepted the decline of his sons as fate instead of fighting harder for answers. He had failed them in the worst way a father could. And if he hadn't walked into the living room at that exact moment, he might have gone on believing it all. He sat there for a long time, staring at the final frame, Miranda poisoning his children while smiling as if she were doing something kind. His heart felt heavy, but beneath that weight something fierce took shape, determination, fury, resolve. The truth was out now, and once Ethan Walker knew the truth, he never stopped until he made it right. This time would be no different. He shut down the monitors, stood up, and walked toward the door with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Miranda Hall and anyone working with her were about to face consequences they couldn't run from. And his sons Liam and Noah were finally going to get the justice, protection, and freedom they deserved. Ethan did not move immediately after leaving the security room. He stood in the hallway gripping the edge of a console table, his knuckles white, his breath uneven. The mansion felt different now. The soft hum of the automated lights, the distant murmur of staff preparing dinner, the rhythmic clicking of the heating system, it all sounded hollow. Foreign, like he had stepped into a replica of his home rather than the real thing. He pushed away from the table and walked toward the medical wing, each step fueled by a mix of fury and heartbreak. Every hallway he passed seemed to echo with memories of his boys before their supposed diagnosis, running, laughing, chasing each other through the open space, while he pretended to scold them for skidding across the polished floors. Those memories stabbed at him now. He had spent 2 years mourning an illness that didn't exist. 2 years watching his sons fade while praising the woman who was poisoning them. He reached the door to the medical wing and stopped. Through the frosted glass, he could see the blurred silhouette of Miranda Hall. She moved with the same calculated grace he had once found comforting. This time he saw the truth in that grace, every step taken to maintain control, every movement rehearsed like part of a performance. He pushed the door open, and she turned toward him with the warm smile she reserved for parents who were too broken to question her. Ethan, she greeted, her voice coated in sugary calm. I was just preparing their evening supplements. They've been tired today, but that's expected with the progression. Stop, Ethan said, one word low and cutting, enough to make her expression flicker. She tilted her head just slightly, that familiar gesture she used to manipulate concern. Is something wrong? She asked. The question felt like a slap. He walked past her, opened the medicine cabinet, and scanned the rows of prescription bottles, syringes, and supplements she insisted were necessary. None of them were the bottle he saw in the footage. That one she hid somewhere else. Another layer of deception. He turned back to her, his jaw tight. How long have you been adding things to their drinks? Miranda blinked, her calm cracking for the briefest instant. I'm not sure what you mean. She tried to step closer, but Ethan held up a hand, stopping her. I saw you, on the cameras. The air shifted. The mask she wore so effortlessly began to slip. She opened her mouth, searching for an escape route made of lies, but Ethan's voice cut her off again. You repoisoning my children. Her eyes darted to the exit for a fraction of a second, not enough for most people to catch, but enough for Ethan to understand her next move. Before she could take a step, he placed himself between her and the door. Miranda exhaled, and to his shock, her expression didn't fall into guilt or fear. Instead, she straightened her posture and looked at him with a mixture of annoyance and icy composure. You don't understand the situation, she said, dropping the nurturing tone entirely. Your sons need round-the-clock care. Without it, he cut her off again. Walk, he asked sharply. Move, laugh, do the things you told me were impossible. Finally, the facade cracked. Miranda's eyes hardened. You were too desperate to question anything, she said. Too eager to believe the worst so you could blame yourself instead of the world. You made this easy. He stepped toward her, rage burning under his skin. Tell me what you've been giving them. She hesitated, but only for a moment. It's not dangerous in small doses, she said. Just something to encourage dependence. Lucas handled the sourcing. The casual cruelty in her tone made Ethan's stomach twist. She said it as if she were discussing weather or groceries, not the calculated destruction of two children's health. You used my sons, he whispered. She shrugged. You paid well, and you kept paying. He wanted to grab her, drag her to every camera, and force her to watch what she had done. But he knew better. He needed this handled properly. He needed law enforcement, evidence, protocols, things she couldn't twist with rehearsed tears or forged reports. Leave the house, he said now. Security will escort you. Miranda looked at him long enough for the tension to coil in his chest. Then she offered a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. If you think you can win this, you re more Navy than I thought. She pushed past him, and for the first time since hiring her, Ethan saw her as she truly was, a predator hiding behind a certificate, feeding off the trust of families in crisis. He watched her walk away, his pulse pounding. Then he turned toward the twins' room. The boys were slumped in their wheelchairs, the medication draining their energy as it always did. Their small faces looked pale, their lashes heavy against their cheeks. His heart cracked open at the sight. He knelt between them, brushing a hand gently across Noah's forehead. Daddy's here, he whispered, the guilt washing over him like a wave. He kissed Liam's temple. I'm gonna fix this, I swear to you. For a moment, the boys stirred faintly. Noah's fingers curled weakly around his sleeve, and Ethan felt something break inside him. He had failed them in ways he could barely comprehend. But that failure would not continue. He stood up, grabbed his phone, and called the one person he could trust, the family attorney who had handled every major case in his empire. I need emergency action, Ethan said when the man answered. Medical fraud, child endangerment, and probable poisoning. I have video evidence. The attorney's tone sharpened instantly, shifting into professional mode. Where is the perpetrator now? Leaving, Ethan said. But I want law enforcement waiting for her before she gets far. Consider it done. Before ending the call, the attorney asked, do your children need immediate medical attention? Ethan looked at the boys again, so small, so tired, so robbed of the childhood they deserved. Yes, he said firmly. I need a medical team I can trust, and I need them here now. Within minutes, a plan was in motion: police, medical professionals, legal measures, everything that should have happened 2 years ago. But as Ethan moved through the house with renewed purpose, one thought anchored itself in his mind, sharp and unshakable. Emma had been right. She had seen the truth long before he did, and he had pushed her away. That mistake would be the next thing he fixed. Ethan had always moved decisively in business, but that night he moved with a kind of precision driven by terror. Within minutes of calling his attorney, the estate was set into a controlled storm of activity. A private medical team, one he trusted from years of corporate health contracts, was on its way. Police were alerted. Security staff, often invisible in the background, positioned themselves around exits on standby. The mansion, usually sterile and eerily calm, now vibrated with an urgency that matched the pounding in his chest. But even with all the preparation, nothing felt fast enough. He returned to the twins, refusing to let them out of his sight. He lifted Liam from his wheelchair and cradled him against his chest. The boy's head rested heavily on his shoulder, drained by whatever poison Miranda had introduced into his system. No reached weakly toward him, and Ethan gathered him close as well, carefully arranging them both beside him on the couch. It had been so long since he held them like this. Their bodies, fragile and warm, reminded him of the nights he stayed awake in the nursery when they were infants, afraid of doing something wrong. He had been terrified then too. But now the fear felt sharper, weighted with the reality that his son's suffering had come from his own misjudgment. When the medical team arrived, a group led by Dr. Raymond Keller, a neurologist with a reputation for brutal honesty, Ethan stood to greet them. Dr. Keller took one look at the boys and set his briefcase on the floor without even greeting Ethan. He crouched beside the couch, examining their breathing, tapping reflex points, checking their pupils. His movements were swift but gentle. After a few minutes he looked up. "They resedated," he said. "Not naturally, something pharmacological." The words hit Ethan like a blow. "Can you help them?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with desperation. "Yes," Keller said, "but I need to know everything they've been given." Ethan didn't hesitate. IV recorded proof. The nurse was poisoning them. Keller stared at him for a long, heavy second. Then he nodded once, sharp and focused. "We will stabilize them first, then we will talk." The team worked quickly, inserting IVs, drawing blood, monitoring vitals. The boys' color improved gradually as the medication flushed from their systems. Watching them recover even slightly filled Ethan with a mix of relief and anguish. He had accepted their weakened state as permanent for so long. Now he could see their faces filling with life again, their fingers twitching with small, instinctive movements that suggested strength rather than decay. While the medical team did their work, 2 police officers arrived at the estate. Ethan briefed them quickly, handing over a hard drive containing the relevant footage. They promised to intercept Miranda before she got far. Though he should have felt satisfaction, he felt only exhaustion and bitterness. The damage was already done. Arresting her wouldn't give back the time stolen from his sons. When the officers left, Dr. Keller approached him. "Their blood work will confirm everything," he said. "But based on their recovery already, I'd bet good money that they were being given a neuromuscular depressant." Ethan clenched his fists. "Will it cause permanent harm?" Keller shook his head. "Not if we treat them now. They were young, their bodies can bounce back. Kids are stronger than we give them credit for." Ethan exhaled shakily. It was the first hopeful thing he'd heard in 2 years. But Keller wasn't finished. "Mr. Walker," he continued, "I don't understand something." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "You said they were diagnosed with a degenerative muscle disorder. Even without the poison, I would expect more atrophy. Their muscle tone is weak, yes, but not consistent with advanced disease. Their structure is intact. It's unusual." Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What are you saying?" Keller hesitated thoughtfully. "I'm saying I'm not convinced they ever had the disorder at all." The statement gutted Ethan. For months he had told himself he was fighting an unstoppable illness. For months he'd accepted Miranda's warnings about worsening symptoms as evidence of fate, not full play. Now the truth stood in front of him in cold, clinical language. "They were never sick," he whispered. Keller's face softened slightly. "I can't say that for sure until tests come back, but the signs point that way." For a moment, Ethan had to brace himself against the side of the couch. The implications were too large to grasp all at once. Everything he believed, every choice he made, every fear he carried, it had all been shaped by a lie. And worse, he had allowed that lie to push away the one person who had seen the truth. Emma. Her name hit him like a punch to the chest. Keller continued speaking, but Ethan's mind drifted back to the footage he had watched earlier. Emma kneeling beside the twins, Emma encouraging them. Emma catching them when their legs trembled. Emma laughing softly as she coaxed small steps from them. Emma doing exactly what he had hired her to do, protecting and caring for his children while he barely acknowledged her existence. When Keller finally stepped away, Ethan moved toward the window, staring into the night. The city skyline glittered across the horizon, indifferent to what was unfolding inside his home. He pressed a hand against the glass. He didn't care about business demands, board meetings, investors, or the public persona attached to his name. All he cared about now was the truth. And part of that truth was that he had wronged Emma in a way he couldn't ignore. He replayed their last interaction, her pleading with him to understand, her insisting the twins were stronger than he believed. Her eyes filled with fear, not for herself, but for the boys. He had thrown her out, dismissing her as if her care meant nothing. and yet she was the reason his sons still had the strength to stand at all. He thought of the yellow gloves she always wore. At first he had found them odd, but he later realized they were a habit from her cleaning duties. Yet in every clip those gloves became a symbol bright against the dull backdrop of medical machines, protective, constant, steady. She had been the only color in a home drowning in clinical white and gray, and he had pushed her away. He turned back to Keller. When they restable, he said, "I need you to help me verify every part of their original diagnosis." Keller nodded. "Absolutely." Ethan continued, "And I need to find someone." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "Someone important." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, more important than I realized." He didn't say her name aloud, but he knew exactly who he meant. Emma had been the hinge in his son's story, the quiet force turning them toward life instead of the manufactured illness imposed on them. Finding her wasn't just a matter of apology, it was a matter of justice, gratitude, and possibly redemption. As the twins rested under the care of real professionals, Ethan made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to fix the damage done to his family. He would uncover every truth, hold every guilty party accountable, and reclaim every day stolen from his sons. And when all of that was done, he would find Emma Brooks, because she had saved his children when he couldn't. And whether he deserved her forgiveness or not, he would try to earn it. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He paced the mansion long after the medical team settled the twins into a monitored recovery room. Every time he stopped at their bedside, watching their chests rise and fall in a steady rhythm, he felt a surge of anger so sharp it nearly unbalanced him. 2 years he had lived under the weight of a lie. 2 years believing his children were losing their strength to a cruel disease. 2 years trusting someone who saw them as financial leverage rather than human beings. And woven into that anger was something even worse: regret. Regret for not seeing the truth sooner. Regret for sending away the person who had been fighting for his children when he had been too blinded by fear and medical jargon to recognize it. As dawn lifted over San Francisco, painting the skyline in shades of gold, Ethan sat in his office reviewing the footage again. Every clip of Emma with the twins hit him harder than the last. The tenderness in her movements, the way she mirrored their fragile attempts at standing, the way she celebrated their smallest victories as if they were milestones, all of it cracked him open. She had done more for them in months than Miranda had in years. More than he thought bitterly. Because she hadn't been paralyzed by the diagnosis, she had looked at the boys and seen children, not patients. And children always tried to grow, even when adults told them they couldn't. His attorney called mid-morning with an update. Miranda had been intercepted at a gas station outside the city. She was in custody. Lucas, too. The evidence Ethan provided was overwhelming. For a moment Ethan closed his eyes, absorbing the information. He should have felt relief, maybe triumph. Instead he felt drained. The victory was hollow. Arresting them didn't undo the harm. It didn't erase the hours he spent grieving imaginary losses. It didn't restore the trust he had shattered when he fired Emma without listening to her. Justice wasn't enough. He needed to repair what he had broken. Juter Keller returned to the estate later that morning with preliminary results. He spread the documents across Ethan's desk and spoke with the crisp efficiency of someone who didn't need theatrics to make his point. The boys were given a depressant consistent with neuromuscular blocking agents, he explained. It wasn't enough to permanently harm them, but it was enough to mimic symptoms of a degenerative disorder. Ethan's jaw tightened. Can you confirm they never had the illness? Keller tapped one chart based on current findings. Yes, I can. Their muscle fibers don't show signs of long-term deterioration. Their reflex patterns are intact. Their baseline physiology is stronger than expected. He paused, tilting his head as if still trying to reconcile the contradiction himself. The only thing that inhibited their growth was the poison. Ethan stared at the papers until the words blurred. He felt something inside him waver again: anger, sorrow, guilt, all of it mixing into one crushing weight. Can they fully recover? He asked. Keller nodded. Yes, with time, therapy, and proper support, they should regain everything they lost. The word lost echoed in Ethan's mind. So much had been taken, so much time, so many moments. But at least now there was a path forward. The twins were resting when he visited them next. Brightness had returned to their faces, small but unmistakable. Liam used his fingers to play with a toy car on the blanket, something he hadn't had the strength for in months. No perked up when Ethan entered, reaching both arms toward him with a weak but determined smile. Ethan gathered them in his arms, feeling their small bodies press against him with trust he didn't deserve. I'm here, he whispered into their hair, holding them closer than he had in a long time. I'm going to make everything better. I promise. But making things better meant more than medical care and legal action. It meant facing what he had done to Emma. By the afternoon, the twins were strong enough for Keller to run a full examination. Ethan stayed for every minute, refusing to step away. When the boys needed breaks, he carried them, kissed their cheeks, and told them how proud he was. The medical team quietly exchanged glances, not because of the children, but because of Ethan. They were watching a father who had finally understood how profoundly he'd been manipulated. Later, after the last test was completed, Keller placed a hand on his shoulder. "They were fighters," he said. "Whoever was working with them before she did good work. Their muscles show signs of regular engagement. Not what I'd expect from children who were supposedly immobilized." Ethan's chest tightened. "That was Emma," he said quietly. "She was the one helping them." Keller nodded slowly. "Then you owe her credit and probably an apology." The understatement stung. Ethan looked toward the window again, out to the city, the hills, the fog rolling in. Somewhere out there was the woman who had carried his sons through the hardest part of their lives. And he had thrown her out of his home like she meant nothing. He pulled out his phone, determined to find her immediately. But he didn't know her personal number. He had never bothered to ask. He scrolled through old emails, staff logs, anything that might help. He found her application, a short and modest document that said almost nothing about her. A few references. Past job in a small-town daycare, volunteer work at a community center. Not one detail that hinted she was the person who would ultimately save his children. He called her references. Most didn't pick up. Those who did either hadn't spoken to her in months or didn't have current contact information. He called the staffing agency he hired her from. They informed him she hadn't checked in since leaving her last position, his home. It was as if she had vanished. Ethan clenched his phone. "Keep searching," he told his assistant, who was already running background checks and scanning public databases. "I don't care how long it takes, find her." The rest of the day was devoted to stabilizing the boys and speaking with detectives. The officers were thorough, documenting everything, asking pointed questions, coordinating a case that would likely become national news once the press caught wind of it. Ethan cooperated fully, offering every record, every video, every document related to the twins' care. He didn't hide from responsibility. He met it head on. But throughout every conversation, every update, every medical briefing, one thought repeated in his mind like a heartbeat. "Emma saved my boys. I need to find her. I need to set things right." As evening settled again, the twins slept peacefully for the first time in months. Their bodies finally free from the chemical weight Miranda had forced on them. Ethan sat beside their beds until their breathing deepened. Then he stood, pulled out his phone once more, and stared at the empty search screen. He would find her. No matter where she had gone, no matter how long it took, he would bring Emma back into the lives she had protected. And once he did, he would tell her the truth, that she had been the one light in the darkest chapter of his family's life, and he would never overlook her again. The investigation moved faster than Ethan expected. By the next morning, the case had already escalated from a local police matter to a multi-agency collaboration involving state authorities and federal investigators specializing in medical fraud. Ethan Walker's name alone drew high-level attention, but the evidence, the footage, the blood work, the timestamps, the financial trails made the situation too large to contain quietly. This wasn't just a rogue nurse abusing a position of trust. It was a network, an organized scheme targeting vulnerable families with resources and desperation. The kind of crime that demanded headlines. The kind that stirred outrage. Ethan didn't care about the public response. He didn't care about the legal spectacle that would follow. All he cared about was his sons and the woman who had cared for them when he hadn't known how. Detectives came and went throughout the day, interviewing staff, collecting statements, cross-checking recorded footage. Each officer treated Ethan with a mix of professionalism and caution, aware of his influence but unwilling to gloss over any detail. He offered full cooperation. He held nothing back, not even his own failures. He wanted the truth documented accurately, even if it painted him as negligent. The lead detective, Marcus Hale, was blunt in a way Ethan appreciated. "You were targeted," Hale told him during one of the briefings. "People like you, high net worth, emotionally vulnerable, juggling a demanding career, willing to pay for answers, make ideal marks." Hall and her partner knew exactly what they were doing. Ethan exhaled slowly. "It doesn't change the fact that I let them do it," he said. Hale studied him with a sympathetic gaze Ethan didn't expect. "You trusted someone who presented credentials and results. That's not negligence. That's being human." Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't ready to accept forgiveness, even from a stranger. As the detectives combed through the mansion, Keller continued his assessments of the twins. At intervals, he called Ethan in to observe their progress. The boys were regaining strength as the medication cleared their systems. Their voices grew louder, their eyes tracked movement with more energy. Their fingers curled around toys with newfound resolve. Watching them reclaim the pieces of themselves that had been stolen filled Ethan with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Every improvement made him think of Emma. He remembered how she had insisted the twins were stronger than he believed. How she had looked at him with genuine plea, begging for him to understand something he had refused to hear. How she had reached toward the boys before security escorted her out, afraid of what they would face without her. His chest tightened each time the memory replayed. By mid-afternoon the media had begun swirling. Reporters gathered at the gate, drones hovered overhead, and phones buzzed with alerts speculating about the scandal inside the Walker estate. Ethan ignored the chaos, though his staff scrambled to control the narrative. He issued a brief statement through his legal team: "My priority is my sons. All other matters will be addressed in due time." He had no interest in shaping a public image. The truth mattered more than perception. But the world outside didn't stop spinning simply because Ethan's life had collapsed. News channels ran segments about medical fraud rings. Social media dissected the story from every angle. Former patients of Miranda Hall came forward. Lawsuits began forming. The scandal grew wider, darker, deeper. And through it all, Ethan's determination sharpened. He had spent 2 years trusting the wrong person. He wouldn't spend another day without finding the right one. He stood in the kitchen that evening, reviewing another set of messages from his assistant leads. Partial addresses. Outdated phone numbers connected to Emma's past. No confirmation yet. Some trails ended abruptly. Others led to people who remembered her fondly but had lost touch. He found himself imagining where she might be now. Did she think about the twins? Did she worry about what would happen to them? Did she assume Ethan still believed she had endangered them? The thought gnawed at him. He needed her to know that he understood the truth now. Drewter Keller interrupted his thoughts by entering the room with a stack of charts. "Their recovery is progressing," he announced. "Better than I anticipated." Ethan set his phone aside. "How long until they regain full mobility?" Keller adjusted his glasses. "Weeks, maybe sooner. Their bodies were suppressed, not damaged." Ethan felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost destabilized him. He nodded and exhaled deeply. "Thank you, Doctor." Keller softened his expression. "If I may say something, Walker, the twins clearly had someone who kept them moving when their environment discouraged it. That's the only reason they were bouncing back so quickly." Ethan absorbed that quietly. Keller didn't know the full story, but he sensed enough. As the evening settled in, Ethan returned to the twins' room. They were awake now, sitting up in bed, watching cartoons with the kind of energy he hadn't seen in years. Liam glanced at him, his eyes brighter. "Daddy," he murmured, lifting his arms. Ethan climbed onto the bed, pulling both boys close. No poked his cheek. "Where's Emmy?" he asked in a small, hopeful voice. The question sliced through him. He kissed No's forehead. "I'm looking for her," he said, swallowing past the tightness in his throat. "I'll bring her back." No smiled softly, satisfied with the promise. Later, when the boys finally dozed off again, Ethan retreated his office. The house had quieted, but his mind churned like a storm. He reopened Emma's file, tracing every detail: the daycare job, the volunteer hours. The modest sum that told him nothing about her heart, her instincts, her courage. He realized how little he knew about her, not because she was forgettable, but because he had never taken the time to see her when she was right in front of him. He stood abruptly, driven by a surge of restless focus. He began calling private investigators, hiring multiple teams at once. He authorized unlimited budgets. He gave them access to everything. "Find her," he instructed. "Her name is Emma Brooks. She worked for me. She protected my sons. I need to speak with her as soon as possible." Each investigator assured him they would start immediately. But as they worked, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Finding Emma was no longer just about apologizing. It wasn't just about gratitude or closure or correcting the wrong he had done. It was about acknowledging that she had become a part of his sons' lives in a way no one else had. She had held their hands when he wasn't there. She had taught them to trust their own strength. She had believed in their future when he had accepted a false fate. She had been the light in a chapter filled with manufactured darkness. And Ethan Walker would not rest until he brought her back, not only for the twins, because he knew deep in his chest that Emma Brooks was the missing piece of something far larger than a single lie or a single mistake. She was the beginning of the truth. 2 days after Miranda's arrest, the mansion felt like a different world. The medical equipment had been scaled back, the constant stream of staff had slowed, and the twins were growing more energetic by the hour. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan could hear their laughter echo softly through the hallway as they played with a physical therapist, Dreyer. Keller recommended, It was a sound that should have brought joy. Instead, it left a knot in his chest, because he couldn't erase the truth behind their progress. This wasn't a miracle recovery, but a return to what had always been possible if he had trusted the right person. Late that morning, Judah Keller arrived with a thick binder in hand, its weight symbolic of the truth Ethan had spent years searching for. "The full report is ready," Keller said, offering the binder with a sullen expression. Ethan took it, his hands heavier than he expected. They sat in the living room, the same place where he had first seen his son standing with Emma. The memory stung. Keller opened the binder and pointed to the first page. "This confirms it," he explained. "Your sons never had the degenerative disease they were diagnosed with." Ethan swallowed hard, even though he'd already known the answer would be this. Knowing it and seeing it documented in irrefutable clinical detail were two different things. Keller continued, "Every symptom you believed was part of a genetic disorder was induced. They were progressing at the pace of the substances in their bodies, not a disease." Ethan's throat tightened. He closed the binder and pressed his hand against the cover as if it were scorching hot. "How could I have missed this?" he murmured. Keller leaned back slightly. "Mr. Walker, many parents would have missed it. You were overwhelmed, desperate for clarity, relying on someone trained to manipulate that desperation. The medical terminology, the stage symptoms, the induced weakness, anyone would have believed it." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Emma didn't. The admission came out rough, almost hoarse." Keller nodded. "I can tell from their reflexes and muscle tone that someone was working with them consistently, even while they were affected by the drugs. Whoever did that preserved their physical abilities." Ethan rested his forehead in his hand for a moment. "She did that," he whispered. "She saw what none of us did." Keller closed the binder. "You owe her a great deal." The words were simple, but they pierced him deeply. He nodded. "I know." After Keller left to resume treatment with the twins, Ethan stayed seated on the couch, staring at the empty space in front of him. The house felt too large, too quiet, too full of memories of moments he had misinterpreted. Every recollection of Emma returned now with painful clarity, the gentle encouragements he had ignored, the creative games she used to get the boys moving, the way they clung to her, trusting her instinctively. He remembered the day he fired her, the way her face crumpled, not in fear of losing her job, but in fear for the children she loved. The boys reaching for her, crying her name. He had convinced himself she was endangering them, when she had been saving them. The weight of that mistake felt suffocating. He stood abruptly, driven by a mix of shame and determination. He couldn't regress into guilt, he needed to take action. He walked to his office and stared at the whiteboard where investigators had mapped out Miranda and Lucas's financial scheme. Lines, dates, names, an entire web of deception. And on a small corner of the board was a sticky note with Emma's name, written in his assistant's handwriting. "Current whereabouts unknown." Those words taunted him. It had been 48 hours and still no solid lead. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "There has to be something," he muttered. He reopened every message he'd received from investigators, every database search, every background check. He combed through her references again, listening carefully to voicemails from old coworkers. They all spoke fondly of her, kind, patient, dependable, but none knew where she had gone. Eventually he called the staffing agency again. This time he pushed past the polite receptionist and demanded to speak to the director. She didn't update her address, the director explained apologetically. "Many applicants move often, some don't keep files updated." "Was she looking for new work before she left my home?" Ethan asked. "Not that we're aware of." He hung up, feeling more troubled. She hadn't planned to leave. She had only left because of him. Restlessness pushed him through the house again. He checked on the twins. They were on the floor with their therapist, building a tower of foam blocks. No grinned at the growing structure. Liam clapped when it didn't collapse. Ethan crouched beside them. "Hey, you two," he said softly. Liam leaned against him. No tapped his leg. "Daddy, Emma made towers with us too." Ethan's heart clenched. "I know, buddy," he whispered, stroking No's hair. "I'm trying to find her." He stayed with them until their session ended. When the therapist left, the twins napped, and the house softened around them. Ethan returned to the living room and stared at the big windows overlooking the city. He thought of Emma somewhere out there carrying groceries, riding a bus, working a part-time job. Unaware that he had discovered the truth she tried so hard to show him. He pictured her wearing those yellow gloves, wiping counters while humming softly, pausing to help the boys stretch their legs or stand for a few precious seconds. She had understood something he had forgotten, that children grow when someone believes they can. The thought hit him hard enough that he had to sit. He pressed both hands to his face. "I need to tell her I'm sorry," he breathed. "I need to tell her she saved them." But more than that, something deeper stirred in him, a realization that Emma had not just helped the twins grow. She had changed him too. She had held up a mirror to his fear, his blindness, his grief. And instead of judging him, she had focused on loving the children who needed her most. Ethan lowered his hands and let out a shaky exhale. He didn't fully understand what Emma had come to mean to him, but he knew it was more than gratitude. He stood up again with renewed resolve. He returned to his office, sat at his desk, and wrote a list on a fresh sheet of paper, places she might go. People who may know her, locations she mentioned, search expansions. With every line he wrote, his determination sharpened. He contacted the private investigators again. Expand the search perimeter, he ordered. Look at shelters, short-term rentals, transportation logs. Check with community centers. She volunteered at several in Oregon. Someone there might know where she goes when she's overwhelmed. He paused before adding, and if you find her, tell her nothing except that her former employer wants to speak with her. I don't want to frighten her. When he ended the call, he leaned back in his chair. He wasn't a man used to waiting, but for Emma, he would. For the first time in years, he felt something like hope, not the fragile, desperate hope he felt in hospital rooms, but a steady determination that came from truth. His sons were healing, the lies were unraveling, justice was underway. And somewhere beyond the fog-covered hills of San Francisco, Emma Brooks was out there, not knowing her absence echoed through the Walker home more profoundly than she could ever imagine. Ethan would find her, not because he needed closure, but because the future of his family would never feel complete without the person who had quietly held it together. The weeks that followed felt like a rebirth inside the Walker household. The medical wing that once dominated the mansion with cold machines and dim lighting was slowly dismantled and replaced with bright rugs, wooden toys, an open space for the twins to move freely. Keller's treatment plan worked better than anyone expected. Each day, Liam and No grew stronger, their muscles reacclimating to movement with the enthusiasm only children could possess. Ethan watched every step of their progress. The first time they held themselves upright without support, the first few steps they took across the room, the way their voices grew clearer and more confident with every passing day. These were milestones he had prayed for years ago, never imagining he had been fighting the wrong battle. The physical therapist turned the once sterile space into a playground of progress. Foam blocks, mini trampolines, soft balance beams, and colorful mats covered the floor. At first, the boys wobbled when they tried to walk between the mats, their legs uncertain, their steps short and tense. But each day they pushed harder. Liam learned to shift his weight like a determined little soldier. No regained his natural bounce, giggling every time he took a few steps and landed in the therapist's arms. Ethan stood nearby every session, unable to look away. Each small victory tore at his heart, joy because his sons were recovering, pain because they should have never lost their strength in the first place. With their progress came new emotions. The boys began talking more, smiling more often, asking for games and stories. And almost every day they asked the same question: when is Emma coming back? The question struck Ethan in the gut every time. He answered with the same promise: Daddy's looking for her, even though each day without a lead made that promise feel more fragile. Still, he refused to let go of the hope that they would find her. On the day the twins managed to walk from one end of the therapy room to the other without assistance, the therapist clapped proudly and announced, "You two are stronger than most adults Ivy worked with." Ethan laughed as No puffed out his chest. Liam grinned shyly, hugging Ethan's leg as if he had just climbed a mountain. Ethan knelt beside them, pulling them into a tight embrace. "You're amazing," he whispered into their hair, "both of you." Then softly, No whispered, "Emma said we were strong even when everyone else didn't know." Ethan closed his eyes, swallowing the weight in his chest. "She was right," he murmured. "She was always right." That afternoon, Ethan headed to his office to review updates from the investigators. The search for Emma had broadened across multiple states. They followed records, checked shelters and short-term rentals, tracked old acquaintances, but no solid trace had emerged yet. It was as if she had melted into the background of the world, the same way she had existed unnoticed in his home until the day he finally saw her. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Where are you, Emma?" he whispered, wishing she could hear him. Later that evening, Ethan found Liam sitting alone on the rug with a box of crayons. No was napping on the couch, exhausted from the day's progress. Liam was drawing with surprising concentration for a 5-year-old. Ethan sat beside him. "What are you working on?" Liam didn't answer right away. He picked up the yellow crayon and carefully colored the shape of a glove. Only then did he lift his small face to Ethan. "This is for Emma," he said, "because she always wore her gloves when she helped us walk." Ethan felt his throat tighten. It's beautiful, he said softly. Liam nodded, satisfied. I want to give it to her when she comes back. Ethan wrapped an arm around his son. You will, he promised. One day you will. The next morning, inspired by Liam's drawing, Ethan visited a custom gift shop in the city. He had something special in mind, something that would represent Emma's role in the twins' healing. The shop owner listened carefully as Ethan explained what he wanted: a shadow box frame made of cherry wood, lined with soft cream felt, designed to hold a single golden glove, not flashy, not ostentatious, but meaningful. It needs to feel like gratitude, Ethan said, not a trophy, not a showpiece, something honest. The owner nodded, touched by the sincerity in Ethan's voice. I can do that, she said. Give me a week. Ethan left the store with the feeling that he had taken one small step toward acknowledging everything Emma represented: her courage, her kindness, her intuition, her fight for the twins when he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Back at home, the boys' laughter drifted down the hallway as they raced toy cars across the living room floor. Ethan joined them on the ground, letting them drive the cars over his hands, his legs, his chest. They giggled uncontrollably when he pretended the cars knocked him over. For a moment, the house felt whole again, or as close to whole as it could feel without Emma. That night, Dr. Keller gave Ethan a final update on the twins' medical status. They were officially cleared, he said. No traces of the depressant left. Muscle strength improving rapidly. At this rate, they should be fully recovered within a few months. Ethan exhaled, gratitude washing through him. Thank you, he said, for everything. Keller smiled faintly. I just did my job. Person who truly saved them is still out there. As Keller left, Ethan stood in the doorway watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. The fog was rolling in over the bay, the glow of the Golden Gate Bridge pulsing through it. Somewhere in that vast, sprawling landscape was Emma Brooks, unaware that two little boys were walking again because of her. Unaware that the father who once pushed her away now searched for her with the urgency of a man trying to reclaim the missing piece of his family's future. The next morning, the custom shadow box arrived earlier than expected. Ethan opened the package carefully and lifted the frame into the light. It was perfect, subtle, warm, handcrafted with care. He imagined placing one of Emma's yellow gloves inside. The glove that had become a symbol of everything she had done when no one was watching. He imagined handing it to her one day, telling her the truth of what she had meant to them. The thought filled him with both hope and longing. He placed the frame gently on the mantel, where he could see it every time he walked through the room. It wasn't just a gift waiting to be delivered. It was a promise to his sons, to Emma, and to himself. A promise that the next chapter of their lives would not be built on lies or regret. A promise that when he found Emma Brooks, he would thank her for giving his children their future back. A promise that he would never make the mistake of overlooking her again. 6 months passed, and for the first time in years, the Walker mansion looked and felt like a home rather than a medical facility. The air was filled with laughter instead of the monotone hum of machinery. The hallways echoed with running footsteps instead of the squeak of wheelchairs. Liam and Noah had transformed from fragile shadows into bright, energetic 5-year-olds who enjoyed racing down the long corridors, shouting with joy as if reclaiming all the childhood stolen from them. And today the house buzzed with an excitement that had been absent for far too long. Their birthday. Balloons lined the entryway in shades of blue and green. Streamers hung from the ceilings. Tables were covered with treats, colorful cups, and rows of neatly wrapped gifts. A bounce house had been set up outdoors on the backyard lawn, vibrant and inflated under the California sun. Ethan watched from the patio as his sons ran across the grass, their feet pounding confidently into the earth. He still hadn't grown used to it, the sight of them moving on their own, playing freely, unburdened by fabricated illness. It overwhelmed him each time he saw it, like witnessing a miracle in slow motion. Their recovery had become a point of inspiration for the community, though Ethan turned down every interview and politely refused all publicity. This day wasn't for cameras or statements, it was for the boys. And if things went as he hoped, it would also be for someone else. Behind him, the therapist guided the boys toward a table of crafts, laughing as they tugged her along. Ethan followed with a smile, grateful that life had found its rhythm again. And yet, a small H remained in the back of his mind, the H of absence. Because even as the twins thrived, even as justice was served and recovery completed, one piece of the family's puzzle was still missing. Emma Brooks. For 6 months, private investigators had searched tirelessly. They cataloged every possible lead, explored every trace, and followed every hint. But Emma had slipped into the world with the same unassuming grace she carried in the Walker home. She left no digital trail, no active accounts, no clear destination. It was as if she had quietly stepped out of the frame at the moment her role was complete. But Ethan refused to believe she was gone forever. 2 days ago, for the first time in months, he'd received a promising lead. A young woman matching Emma's description was seen volunteering at a community center outside Redwood City. He had considered racing there instantly, but the center director told him the volunteer only came on certain days, irregularly. And so, after a long conversation, after explaining the truth and showing proof of everything that had happened, Ethan asked for one thing: if she returned, please give her this invitation. The invitation was handwritten, simple and honest, a request for her to come to the twins' birthday party. No expectations, no obligations, no pressure. Only an open door. He hadn't told the boys. He didn't want to disappoint them if she didn't appear. The afternoon sun hung warm in the sky as guests arrived: neighbors, school friends, a few of Ethan's close colleagues who had supported him through the ordeal. Music played softly through outdoor speakers, and the backyard filled with movement, chatter, and childhood joy. Liam and No tore through the crowd with boundless energy. They laughed as they climbed the inflatable castle, shouted as they jumped, and raced each other down the slide. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, hands in his pockets, watching them with pride. They were unstoppable now, healthy, safe, whole. And yet, as he scanned the crowd, his heartbeat stumbled. At the gate stood a familiar figure, one he'd memorized without realizing it. She wore simple jeans, a soft sweater, and her hair pulled into a low ponytail. Her presence was quiet, gentle, and yet to Ethan she stood out like the answer to a question he'd been asking for months. Emma. She hesitated, her hand resting lightly on the gate, unsure if she should enter. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. His breath hitched in his chest, emotion rushing up before he could contain it. Then, with steady steps, he walked toward her. She turned as he approached, and the faint tremble in her expression broke him. It was the same look she had given him the day he fired her, fragile, hopeful, afraid. But now, layered beneath that uncertainty, there was another expression too, a quiet strength. The same strength she had shown every day while working with his sons. Emma, Ethan said softly when he reached her, her eyes lifted to his. Mr. Walker, she murmured. I didn't know if I should come. I'm glad you did, he replied, more than you know. She looked past him into the yard. Liam and No were racing each other toward the slide, their legs moving with strong, confident strides. The sight seemed to knock the air from her lungs. Her hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. Ethan felt emotion push hard against his throat. They've made a full recovery, he said quietly, because of you. She shook her head as if unable to accept the praise. I just helped them stand, she whispered. You saved them, Ethan corrected, his voice thick. You protected them when I failed to. Emma's breath hitched. She looked down, tears landing softly against her palm. He wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her she deserved every thank you in the world, but he waited. She had earned that respect, the right to set the pace. After a moment, she lifted her face again, her eyes shimmering. I missed them, she admitted, every day. Ethan nodded slowly. They missed you too. As if summoned by the force of those words, Liam spotted her, his entire body froze. Then, with a sudden burst of joy, he shouted, Emma! No turned instantly, and his face lit up like a lantern. Emma! They yelled together, racing toward her as fast as their legs could carry them. Emma gasped as the twins collided with her legs, hugging her so tightly she stumbled. She dropped to her knees, arms wrapping around them instinctively, fiercely, lovingly. The boys clung to her, babbling excitedly, showing her how they could stand, how they could run, how they could jump, as if proving to her that they had kept their promise to get stronger. Ethan watched the reunion with a heart so full it felt unsteady. For months, he had imagined this moment. No version he created came close to the reality unfolding before him. After a long time, Emma rose slowly, still holding the twins' hands. Ethan stepped closer and offered a small box. This is for you, he said. She opened it carefully. Inside was the custom shadow box, the golden glove resting inside like a symbol of everything she had done. Her breath caught, eyes widening. Ethan, it's yours, he said gently. Because you held our family together when everything was falling apart. She pressed a hand over her heart, overwhelmed. Ethan looked at her then, truly looked at the woman who had changed everything. And with the twins hugging her legs, the sun warming the yard, and the future wide open before them, he said the words that had lived inside him for months. Emma, will you stay, not as staff, not as a guest, as part of our family? Her tears fell freely now, she nodded. And for the first time in years, Ethan Walker felt complete. Life rarely shatters in one loud moment. More often, it breaks in small pieces we don't notice until we re-standing in the wreckage wondering how we missed the cracks. Ethan Walker's story teaches us that even the strongest, richest, or most intelligent people can lose their way when fear governs their decisions. He loved his sons fiercely, but fear blinded him to the truth right in front of him. Instead of trusting his instincts, he trusted authority simply because it wore a uniform of professionalism. He believed in credentials over compassion, in titles over genuine care, and in expertise over intuition. And that is the first lesson. Sometimes the heart sees what the mind refuses to acknowledge. The people who look the most qualified are not always the people who truly protect us. And the ones who quietly do the right thing are often overlooked until it's almost too late. Another powerful lesson woven into this story is the danger of surrendering responsibility. Ethan believed he was helping his children by hiring the best, but in reality, he was handing them over to someone who never saw them as human, only as opportunity. It teaches us that love is not passive. Love demands vigilance. Love demands attention. Love demands the courage to question even the people we trust. Ethan thought he could fix everything by throwing money at the problem, but real healing came from the woman who used patience, kindness, and her own 2 hands to care for his sons. It's a reminder that genuine love doesn't always come dressed in impressive qualifications. Sometimes it comes in the form of someone kneeling on the floor, offering encouragement, holding out steady hands, and believing in possibilities others ignore. A third lesson emerges through the character of Emma. She represents the power of simple, honest goodness. She had no wealth, no advanced degree, no impressive sum. Yet she carried a strength that the most educated experts in the story lack it. She saw the truth because she cared enough to look. She refused to accept the boys' suffering as inevitable. She didn't treat them like fragile diagnoses. She treated them like children capable of joy, growth, and progress. Her love illuminated what everyone else had accepted as reality. And this teaches us that goodness is not measured by stature or status. It is measured by the courage to do what is right when no one is watching. Sometimes the hero in our story isn't the person we expect, but the person who shows up quietly and consistently, day after day, doing small things that ultimately save us. The story also offers a profound lesson about humility. Ethan's greatest failure wasn't trusting the wrong person, it was failing to trust the right one. He dismissed Emma because he saw her as ordinary, and in doing so, he underestimated the extraordinary impact she would have on his family. This shows us how easy it is to misjudge people when we look only at what they appear to be, rather than who they truly are. The world often teaches us to focus on credentials, wealth, influence, and outward strength. But this story reminds us that character, empathy, and integrity are far more powerful than any title or degree. Ethan had to lose everything he believed to finally understand this. And in that painful realization, he grew not as a billionaire, but as a father and a human being. Another lesson is about accountability and redemption. Ethan's guilt could have crushed him. He could have drowned in the shame of discovering he had failed his sons. But instead, he chose accountability. He confronted the truth, took action, and made amends. His willingness to take responsibility fully and without excuses is what allowed healing to begin. Redemption is not about erasing mistakes. It's about what we do after we recognize them. Ethan didn't run from his failures, he faced them. He repaired what he could, protected his sons, and sought forgiveness from the person who deserved it the most. This teaches us that becoming better is always possible, even after we've made terrible choices, as long as we are brave enough to confront them with honesty. Finally, the story teaches us that family is not always defined by blood, sometimes it's defined by heart. Emma became part of their family long before anyone acknowledged it. She loved the boys as if they were her own, fought for them when no one else did, and believed in them when the world failed them. Her presence reminded Ethan that being a parent is not about providing the most expensive care, but about showing up, paying attention, and choosing love every single day. The moment he invited her to stay, not as staff but as part of their lives, reflected his understanding that family grows not through obligation, but through compassion and shared humanity. Together, these lessons form a single, powerful truth: the world is full of people who appear trustworthy and people who genuinely are. The challenge is learning to tell the difference. We must look beyond appearances, beyond titles, beyond assumptions, and pay attention to actions. We must cherish the people who nurture our lives, even if they do so quietly. And we must never forget that the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of a life, or in this case, save two.
If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.